When I married Thomas, I thought the hardest part would be the usual things: learning to share a closet, arguing about which way the toilet paper should hang, blending routines. But none of that compared to her. From day one, Margaret made it painfully clear I wasn't the wife she'd pictured for her precious son. She didn't need to raise her voice. Her disapproval came in polished phrases and polite poison, always with an audience nearby. She had a talent for the kind of compliments that sting long after the words fade. "That's an interesting dress, Isabella. Very brave of you." Or my personal favorite: "Thomas always liked women with strong opinions. It must be exciting for him." I used to laugh it off, play nice, keep the peace. I told myself she'd come around eventually, that maybe she just needed time to see who I really was. But years passed. Holidays came and went, and if anything, she only sharpened her claws. Every dinner, every birthday, every gathering, she turned them into tests I was never meant to pass. I could feel her watching me, waiting for a misstep, measuring me against ghosts I never even met. And Thomas? He'd just sigh and say, "That's just how she is, babe. She'll warm up to you." I started to wonder if he really believed that, or if he just didn't want to see what I saw. The truth is, I tried. I really did. I smiled through the slights, bit my tongue when she corrected me in front of guests, and helped clean up after dinners she never thanked me for. I learned the choreography of keeping the peace: pour the wine, nod politely, dodge the landmines. All for Thomas. I loved him enough to endure it. Or maybe I was just too proud to admit that it hurt more than I let on. There was one night, our second anniversary, when I wore a soft blue dress Thomas had picked out himself. As I walked into the room, Margaret's eyes flicked over me like I was a dust smudge on a glass. She said, "Well, that's different. I suppose not everyone can pull off pastels." Then she laughed. Everyone laughed. And I stood there trying not to shrink, reminding myself that grace doesn't mean silence, just restraint. I began to see how Margaret treated her approval like currency, one I wasn't allowed to earn. She praised Thomas's exes like they were national treasures. "Clara always brought wine from Italy, not the supermarket," she'd say, as if that was the golden standard of womanhood. At first, I wondered if I should be more like them. Now I know, no woman would have ever been good enough for her son. Not unless she could be molded, controlled, owned. Sometimes I'd watch Thomas from across the room, the way he smiled at his mother, completely unaware of the slow erosion happening just behind his back. He never noticed how tightly I held the edge of the table when Margaret spoke, or how my laughter at her comments came a second too late. He didn't see the way I flinched when she brought up Clara again, with that wistful tone that made it clear she still wished things had gone differently. I began to build little rituals to protect myself. Pep talks in the bathroom mirror before family gatherings. One deep breath before answering the door. Lipstick? Always. A small shield of color, like war paint. I thought if I just kept showing up with kindness, if I kept being steady, she'd eventually see I wasn't the enemy. But Margaret didn't want peace. She wanted dominance, and I was beginning to run out of grace. Then, on a quiet Thursday afternoon, something shifted. Not with a fight, not with tears. Just a simple moment, born out of a favor. I offered to help her with her laptop, something basic, routine. But while I waited for the files to load, a folder caught my eye. It wasn't labeled anything suspicious, but inside it, that was the day everything began to change. Funny how some betrayals don't come with fireworks or raised voices, just a soft click of a mouse and a quiet gasp you have to swallow. That day, sitting at her dining room table, Margaret asked me to help with something simple: update her email password. She was unusually pleasant, almost chatty. I thought maybe, just maybe, we were turning a corner. But as her laptop screen blinked open, a window she hadn't closed caught my attention. It wasn't the name of the folder that stood out, something generic, like family docs. But the contents? Entirely different story. Scans of property titles, spreadsheets of undeclared assets, and what looked like forged signatures on financial documents tied to an ongoing inheritance case. My heartbeat didn't just quicken, it thundered. This wasn't awkward paperwork. This was illegal. I remember how my hands hovered for a second, unsure. Part of me wanted to close it immediately, pretend I hadn't seen. But another part, the part that had smiled through years of insults, leaned in. I looked at Margaret then, still fussing with her tea, oblivious to what she'd just handed me. And in that moment, something ancient stirred in me. Not vengeance, not yet, just recognition. I wasn't powerless. Not anymore. I closed the folder like I hadn't seen a thing, smiled sweetly, asked her to retype the password one more time, just to buy a few seconds to breathe. The whole room suddenly felt colder, like the air had thinned. But I kept my voice light, unbothered, the way she liked it. Inside, though, I was already rearranging the chessboard. She had no idea she'd handed me a match, and I was holding the flame. That night, after dinner, I copied the folder quietly while Thomas was upstairs brushing his teeth. Just a quick transfer to a USB I kept in my drawer for work. And while the files loaded, I stared at the screen like I was looking at her reflection. Not the woman she pretended to be, but the one I always knew was there. The manipulator. The deceiver. The woman who'd spent years trying to make me feel small, now crumbling behind digital paperwork. I could have screamed. Could have confronted her right away. But instead, I sat back and smiled. Not out of victory. Not yet. It was something deeper. The stillness that comes when the scales finally balance. I looked at that little USB like it was a key. Not just to her secrets, but to a whole new power. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. Like I wasn't just surviving in her world anymore. I was quietly rewriting the rules. The next morning, I watched her pour coffee like nothing had happened. She wore her usual pearls, that stiff cardigan she always buttoned to the top, as if control could be stitched into fabric. She made small talk about local news, complained about someone's landscaping. Same performance, same stage. But I wasn't her audience anymore. I sipped slowly and smiled back, knowing something she didn't. At one point, she glanced up and asked, "Everything okay, dear?" And I nodded, almost too casually. "Lovely, thank you. You're such a gracious host." That little line landed soft, but with just enough weight to make her pause for half a second. That was new. I used to answer her questions like I was on trial. Now, I let her feel the silence that followed, let her wonder what had shifted. And as I put my cup down, I looked around that pristine kitchen. The framed photos, the polished silver, the illusion of order. And thought, so the queen has a secret. Not the kind you cry over, the kind you pay to bury. I stood, straightened my coat, and said goodbye with a smile that probably looked too kind. But behind it, something had begun to bloom, quiet, steady, and no longer afraid. I spent the next few nights with her secrets spread across my screen like puzzle pieces. No wine, no music, just the quiet click of my mouse and the hum of a truth too big to ignore. The deeper I looked, the uglier it got. Shady property transfers, shell accounts, entire assets tucked away in names I didn't recognize. It wasn't just carelessness. It was deliberate, methodical. She'd built an empire of lies, brick by careful brick. I made copies, labeled everything, organized the documents like I was curating an exhibit no one would ever want to see. Then I reached out to someone I trusted, an old college friend who'd gone into law. Discreet, sharp, no nonsense. I sent over what I had, held my breath, and waited. Her response came quickly. Isabella, if this went public, your mother-in-law would be done. Fines, asset seizure, maybe worse. And just like that, I wasn't holding a match anymore. I was holding fire. Still, I didn't rush. I watched Margaret from across dinner tables and Sunday visits, her voice as sharp as ever, her jabs still dressed as jokes. But something had shifted inside me. Her power didn't land anymore. She could talk all she wanted. I had her truth in my pocket. And one evening, while Thomas was out with friends, I decided it was time for a private conversation. She opened the door wearing her usual smile, tight, rehearsed, a little too curious. Is everything all right? She asked, stepping aside. I didn't answer right away. I just walked in, calm and steady, like I was there to borrow sugar. She offered me tea. I declined, sat down, looked her right in the eye. I wanted her to feel it before I even spoke. That quiet tremor in the air when something is about to change. I know why you've always hated me, I said. No drama, just truth. Her expression didn't falter, not at first. But I saw it. The blink, the breath held for a second too long. I pulled the USB from my coat pocket and slid it across the table. Her hand twitched. This contains everything I found on your laptop, I continued, my voice steady. And before you ask, yes, I've made copies. Safe ones. She tried to speak, but I raised my hand gently, like a teacher silencing a child. You've spent years trying to make me feel like an outsider. Like I wasn't worthy of the seat I already had. But let me be very clear. If you ever speak to me with disrespect again, if you ever try to undermine me, I won't hesitate. I leaned back, letting the weight of it settle. You wanted a war. I just brought the terms. For a moment, she just stared at the USB like it might explode. Her hands, always so composed, so calculated, were suddenly restless. She reached for her pearls, adjusted them, then folded her fingers in her lap as if rehearsing control. But it was too late for performance. I'd pulled back the curtain, and the woman behind it wasn't nearly as terrifying as she believed herself to be. Still, I wasn't there to destroy her. Not unless she made me. I was offering something else entirely. A boundary. One lined with teeth. I told her, you don't have to like me. You never did. But you will respect me. And if you can't manage that, then I promise, your world will collapse before you ever see it coming. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The silence did more damage than any scream could. As I stood to leave, I looked down at her. Smaller now somehow. Or maybe I'd just finally stopped shrinking myself to fit her comfort. Good night, Margaret, I said softly, as if we'd just shared dessert and polite conversation. And as I closed her front door behind me, I felt lighter. Not vindicated yet. No, that would come later. But for the first time in years, I wasn't the one afraid to speak. It didn't happen all at once. Margaret didn't suddenly hug me or apologize or send flowers the next morning. No, the shift was more subtle and far more satisfying. It was in what she didn't say. No more comments about my cooking. No more passive-aggressive digs about my clothes or how I stacked the dishwasher. For the first time in our history, her silence was respectful, maybe even fearful. The next family dinner was the true test. She arrived early, as always, but instead of inspecting the silverware or pointing out a stain on the napkins, she offered to help, just like that. Do you need anything, Isabella? I nearly dropped the serving spoon. I played it cool, nodded once, and handed her the salad tongs. Inside, though, I was savoring every second of it like it was dessert. She didn't dominate the conversation that night. She didn't drop Clara's name once. And when someone complimented the roast chicken, Margaret actually smiled and said, Isabella's really grown into her own, hasn't she? The table went quiet for a second. Even Thomas looked up, confused. I just smiled and took a sip of wine, letting him sit with the mystery, because I wasn't about to spell it out for him. Not yet. Thomas asked me later that night while brushing his teeth, "What's going on with my mom? She's been different." I shrugged, drying my face with a towel, hiding the tiniest smirk. "Maybe she's finally seeing me," I said. I didn't lie. But I didn't explain either, because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let someone else connect the dots, slowly, painfully, on their own. The truth is, Margaret hadn't changed overnight. She'd simply recognized something she never expected to find in me: power. Not loud, not flashy, but unshakable. The kind that settles in your posture, your voice, the way you enter a room and don't ask for space. You take it. She must have realized the rules had shifted. That the daughter-in-law she tried to shrink now held the upper hand. And, oh, how carefully she walked around me now. Invitations to dinner. Thoughtful texts with recipes she thought I might like. She even started calling before visiting, unheard of. It was strange at first, like watching a snake try to dance. But I let her try. Let her attempt her version of grace. Because I knew it wasn't affection that had changed her. It was consequence. And sometimes, that's enough. One Sunday afternoon, during a casual lunch with extended family, someone made a light joke, something about how Margaret and I finally seemed to be getting along. "Took you too long enough," they laughed, reaching for the breadbasket. I looked at Margaret, who froze just slightly, her smile flickering before snapping back into place. I could have laughed. Instead, I gave them all the simplest truth. "Sometimes respect doesn't come with time," I said, gently folding my napkin. "Sometimes it comes with consequences." No one knew exactly what I meant, not even Thomas, who glanced at me with that curious tilt of his head. But Margaret? She understood. Her grip on her wineglass tightened just a bit, and for once she didn't have a clever retort. Only silence. After that, things just settled. The air between us wasn't warm, but it was no longer sharp. She still wore her pearls, still told her stories, but the edges were softer now. Or maybe I'd just stopped letting them cut. And as we cleared the dishes and exchanged polite goodbyes, I could feel something shift beneath it all. Not forgiveness, not friendship. Just a new balance, one that would hold. I don't walk on eggshells anymore. I walk like I belong, like I always did, even when she tried to make me doubt it. Margaret still hosts her garden teas and shares family gossip with that tight little smile. But there's a difference now. She watches what she says. She thinks before she acts. And me? I don't flinch anymore. I don't shrink to fit her comfort. I take up space, unapologetically. At the next family gathering, I wore red. Bold, unmistakable, the kind of color Margaret always called a little too much for daytime. I laughed too loudly. I touched Thomas's shoulder when I spoke. I moved through the room like it was mine, because it was. I had earned every inch of that table, every seat, every glance. Margaret didn't dare challenge me. She just complimented the appetizers and asked if I needed help. At one point, a cousin, tipsy from too much Prosecco, leaned over and said, "You two finally get along. What changed?" I looked over at Margaret, who was watching me from the other end of the table, trying to read my expression. I smiled, calm and deliberate, and said, "Respect is a choice." And I gave her one. There was a silence after that, the kind that says more than any toast ever could. Later that evening, I stood alone in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a mug of tea, watching the last slivers of sunset stretch across the backyard. The house was quiet now, just the soft hum of the dishwasher, distant laughter from the living room. I could hear Margaret's voice, still chatting, still present. But it no longer had the weight it once did. She wasn't the center anymore. And that was the true shift. It wasn't revenge that filled me. It was clarity. I'd spent years waiting for her to soften, to welcome me, to accept me. But I didn't need her approval. I never did. What I needed was to remember what I was capable of. Not cruelty, not manipulation, control. I had found a way to hold her accountable without becoming her. And that kind of power? It doesn't roar. It whispers. And it's heard louder because of it. Before I went upstairs, I opened my desk drawer. The USB was still there, a small silver reminder of everything I could do and everything I didn't need to anymore. I held it for a moment, weighing not just the drive, but the choice. Then I walked over to the trash bin and dropped it in. Not out of forgiveness, but because I knew she'd never make that mistake again. She'd felt what silence could do. I watched as the bin closed, slow and quiet. No fireworks, no triumphant music, just the soft click of a chapter ending. Not because I'd erased the past, but because I no longer needed to hold it in my hand to remember what I'd learned. Power isn't always about exposure. Sometimes it's about knowing you could burn everything down and choosing to let it stand. Later that night, Thomas wrapped his arms around me as we got ready for bed, his voice warm and tired. "You were amazing today," he whispered. I kissed his cheek and smiled, knowing he'd never truly understand what today had cost me, or what it had proven. But that was all right. Not every crown is worn on the head. Some are carried deep, forged in silence and fire. And as I turned off the light, I thought of Margaret, of her pearls, her pride, her perfectly rehearsed performance. She taught me how cruel power can be, how sharp and dismissive. But I taught her something far quieter. I taught her how devastating silence can become. And in the end, that was the lesson she would never forget, because I never let her hear me coming.
"Your services are no longer required," Lana announced, her voice carrying across the mahogany table in our family's boardroom. "Clear your office by tomorrow." I observed the faces around me, board members with raised eyebrows, executives shifting uncomfortably in their leather chairs, and my sister, with that self-satisfied smile I knew all too well. She had waited years for this moment. "Is that all?" I asked, my voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath. "Yes, Valerie, that will be all," Lana replied, already turning her attention to the next agenda item. I gathered my notepad and pen, nodded politely to the board members, and walked out with my dignity intact. The heavy door closed behind me with a soft click that belied the magnitude of what had just happened. I had been fired from our family business, Connors and Tate Solutions, a company I had helped grow from a struggling regional logistics provider to a national powerhouse. My name is Valerie Connors, 43 years old, and until 10 minutes ago, I was the executive vice president of operations at the company my grandfather founded. For over a decade, I had been the one securing contracts, building client relationships, and structuring the deals that accounted for most of our revenue. While Lana focused on corporate image and playing politics with board members, I had been the engine driving our growth in Nashville, Tennessee. I walked to my office, a corner space I had earned through years of dedication. My assistant Natalie looked up, her expression immediately concerned when she saw my face. "Val? What happened in there?" I closed the door behind me before answering. "Lana fired me, effective immediately. I need to clear out tomorrow." Natalie's mouth fell open. "She can't do that. Without you, this place would—" "She can, and she did." I sank into my chair, allowing myself just one moment of shock before the wheels in my mind started turning. Dad made her CEO, and the board approved it. It's her show now. But why? You've brought in over 70% of our major clients. I smiled faintly. And that's precisely why. I've outshined her for years, and she couldn't stand it. But as the initial shock faded, a curious calm settled over me. I opened my desk drawer and pulled out a leather portfolio I'd kept for exactly this scenario. Inside were documents I'd prepared meticulously over the past 5 years. Contracts, agreements, and legal paperwork. "Natalie," I said, my voice steadier now. "Remember that restructuring I implemented 5 years ago? The one where I created VC Strategy Group?" Her eyes widened with realization. "Your consulting LLC? The one that technically holds all the client contracts?" I nodded, allowing myself the first genuine smile since I'd walked into that board meeting. I think it's time to remind my sister exactly who brings in the business around here. I'd seen this coming years ago. Our father, James Connors, had always favored Lana despite her mediocre business acumen. She had the right look, the right connections, and most importantly, she never challenged his authority. I, on the other hand, had ideas. Too many ideas for a daughter in a traditional family business. "You're making waves, Val," Dad would say whenever I proposed a new direction or efficiency. "Let's stick with what works." What worked, apparently, was letting Lana take credit for my innovations. While I built relationships with shipping companies, warehousing facilities, and corporate clients across the Southeast, Lana was the face at industry events. While I negotiated terms that grew our profit margins by double digits annually, Lana gave presentations to the board using my numbers. Our differences extended beyond business. Growing up, Lana was the beauty queen, homecoming royalty, sorority president, all charm and social grace. I was the pragmatic one, more interested in logistics problems than country club politics. "Why can't you be more like your sister?" Mom would ask, not unkindly. "She makes connections so easily." What they never understood was that I made connections too, just different ones. Instead of cocktail parties, I built relationships in conference rooms. Instead of social climbing, I focused on creating value. And over time, clients came to trust me, not the company brand or Lana's polished presentations. 5 years ago, when whispers of succession planning began, I made my move. With the help of my attorney, I created VC Strategy Group LLC, a consulting company with exactly one client, Connors and Tate. On paper, it looked like a tax efficiency measure. In reality, it was my insurance policy. "This structure gives us flexibility," I explained to Dad when I proposed it. "It lets me negotiate directly with clients without all the corporate red tape." He approved it without understanding its implications. Why would he question anything that improved our bottom line? To him, it was just another one of my efficient little fixes, not the foundation of my independence. Over time, I migrated all major client relationships to my LLC. The paperwork was there for anyone to see, if they bothered to look. But Lana was too busy planning her CEO office renovation to notice that the contracts listed VC Strategy Group as the primary service provider, with Connors and Tate as merely the fulfillment partner. Dad's retirement announcement last month had accelerated everything. The succession plan was unveiled. Lana would become CEO, and I would remain in my operational role, essentially doing the work while she wore the title. Or so they thought. The morning after my dismissal, I arrived early to pack my office. The building was quiet. Most employees not due for another hour. I had chosen this time deliberately. No need for an audience. As I boxed up family photos and awards, my phone buzzed. It was Beth Winters from Skyline Distribution, our largest client. "Valerie, what's going on? I just got a strange email from your sister saying she's my new point of contact." I smiled to myself. "Good morning, Beth. Yes, there have been some changes. Lana is the new CEO. But our agreement is with you," Beth said, confusion evident in her voice. "The contract is with VC Strategy Group. Does she understand that?" "I don't think she's reviewed the contracts yet," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. "Would you like me to clarify things with her?" "Please do. We signed with you. not with Connors and Tate. Your expertise is what we're paying for. After hanging up, I continued packing, now with a lighter heart. By the time I finished, similar calls had come in from 3 other major clients. None of them had any intention of working with Lana. At 8:30 a.m., right as the office began filling with employees, my phone lit up with Lana's name. I let it ring twice before answering. Hello, Lana. Where are the client files? Her voice was tight with controlled panic. And why is Beth Winters saying she won't work with us anymore? The client files are exactly where they've always been, I replied calmly. In the shared drive, organized by account. As for Beth, she's exercising her contractual rights. What are you talking about? What contractual rights? I could picture her perfectly, standing in her new CEO office, probably wearing one of her immaculate pantsuits, her face flushed with frustration. Check the contract headers, Lana. All of our major accounts are contracted through VC Strategy Group, my consulting company. Connors and Tate is just the fulfillment partner. The clients chose to work with me, not the family brand. The silence on the other end was deafening. Then, you can't do this. I couldn't help the laugh that escaped me. I already did. 5 years ago, actually, with Dad's approval and the board's signature on every document. This is sabotage. Her voice rose an octave. No, Lana. This is business. You wanted to be CEO? Congratulations. But the relationships, the trust, the actual revenue-generating contracts? Those are mine. By the time I hung up, Natalie had appeared at my door with a cardboard box of her own belongings. I quit this morning, she announced with a smile. Told HR I'll be joining VC Strategy Group effective immediately. The realization hit me fully then. This wasn't just about sweet revenge against Lana. This was my chance to build something truly mine. I picked up my box and took one last look at the office where I'd spent the past 15 years. Let's go, I said. We have a company to build. I spent the rest of the day in my home office, making calls to every major client. By evening, I had confirmed what I already suspected. All 14 of our top-tier accounts would be following me. Together, they represented over 80% of Connors and Tate's annual revenue. What about fulfillment? Asked Thomas Graham from Evergreen Supply Chain. You've got the relationships, Val, but can you handle the actual logistics work? It was a fair question. Until yesterday, I'd had Connors and Tate's infrastructure at my disposal. Their warehouse network, their transportation partners, their software systems. I've been anticipating this transition for some time, I assured him. I've already secured partnerships with 3 regional fulfillment centers. Your operations won't miss a beat. What I didn't tell him was that those partnerships had only been finalized that afternoon, in a flurry of phone calls and hastily signed temporary agreements. I was building the airplane while flying it. By 9 p.m., my dining room table was covered with legal pads, my laptop, and an empty pizza box. I had the clients, I had Natalie, and I had a framework for operations. What I didn't have was a team. As if reading my mind, my phone buzzed with a text from Jordan Ellis, our former operations manager. Heard what happened. Lana's freaking out. Half the ops team is ready to walk. You hiring? Before I could respond, another text came in, this one from Lana. Emergency board meeting tomorrow, 8 a.m. Your presence is required. I laughed out loud. Required? She had fired me just hours ago. Now I was suddenly indispensable? I texted Jordan back. Send me names, everyone who's interested, competitive packages for all. To Lana, I simply responded, I'll have my attorney attend. My phone rang immediately. I let it go to voicemail. When it rang again, I finally answered. This isn't a request, Valerie, Lana snapped. The board wants to understand what's happening with our client base. You owe them an explanation. I don't owe anyone anything, I replied evenly. You fired me, remember? Your services are no longer required. Those were your exact words. That was before I understood the situation with the contracts. The contracts that have been in place for 5 years, the ones that were approved by Dad and the board, those contracts, you deliberately misled everyone. I took a deep breath, tamping down my anger. No, Lana. I created a business structure that protected both the company and the clients. It's not my fault that you never bothered to understand how our business actually operates. That's on you. Dad will never forgive you for this. It was a low blow, but an expected one. Our father had always been her trump card. Perhaps, but unlike you, I've learned to live without his approval. Good luck with your meeting tomorrow. After hanging up, I sat in silence for a few minutes, letting the weight of the day settle over me. Had I spent 15 years preparing for this moment? Not consciously, but I'd always known on some level that Lana would eventually push me out. My LLC hadn't been created as a weapon. It was a shield, a way to protect the value I'd built from family politics. My phone buzzed again. A text from our father. We need to talk. I set the phone aside without replying. Whatever he had to say could wait until tomorrow. Tonight, I needed to focus on building a company from scratch, with clients already expecting service. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to sideline me, Lana had inadvertently given me the push I needed to break free. For years, I'd been pouring my talents into a company that would never truly be mine. Now, I had the chance to build something that was. I opened my laptop and typed out the first line of a new business plan. VC Strategy Group, Full-Service Logistics Solutions. It had a nice ring to it. The next morning brought a flurry of developments. By 7 a.m., Jordan had sent me a list of 8 employees ready to join me immediately. By 7:30, my attorney, Grace Levinson, was on her way to the Connors and Tate board meeting to represent my interests. And by 8 a.m., I was sitting in a temporary office space I'd managed to secure overnight, conducting my first staff meeting as the official CEO of VC Strategy Group. The situation is unique, I explained to the small team gathered around a conference table. We have the clients and the expertise, but we're building our infrastructure on the fly. It won't be easy, but we've got something Connors and Tate doesn't have anymore. The relationships that matter. Natalie and Jordan nodded confidently. The others, mostly analysts and account managers who had followed Jordan, looked nervous but determined. What about the warehouse contracts? Asked Michael Perez, one of our logistics specialists. Connors and Tate has exclusivity with most of the facilities in the region. They do, I acknowledged, which is why we're not fighting on that front. I've secured partnerships with facilities in Chattanooga and Louisville. We'll route through them until we can establish our own local presence. The meeting was interrupted by a call from Grace. I put her on speaker. The board meeting just ended, she reported. It was contentious. Tell me, I said, gesturing for the team to stay. Lana tried to argue that your LLC structure was a breach of fiduciary duty. She wanted the board to pursue legal action. My stomach tightened despite my confidence in our legal position. And the board shut her down. Thoroughly. Apparently 2 of the members had actually read the contracts when they were signed and understood exactly what they were approving. They reminded her that the structure had delivered exceptional results for 5 years. Relief washed over me. So no lawsuit? No lawsuit. But they did authorize her to make you a counteroffer. They want to bring VC Strategy Group in as a formal, permanent contractor with a 5-year commitment. Essentially, they're offering to legitimize the exact arrangement you already had, but with better terms. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or scream. They fire me, then offer to hire my company? Essentially, yes. The offer's actually quite good. 7 figures annually, guaranteed minimums, performance bonuses. They're desperate, Val. Of course they are. They just lost 80% of their revenue stream overnight. I looked around at my new team, all watching intently. Tell them I'll review their proposal, but we're moving forward with direct client relationships in the meantime. After ending the call, I turned back to the team. It seems we have options. Are you considering it? Jordan asked, his expression concerned. Going back to them as a contractor? I understood his worry. He'd just quit his job to join me. They all had. I'm not considering anything that doesn't include all of you, I assured them. But having Connors and Tate as a client rather than an employer could be advantageous while we build our own operations. The temporary office door opened, and a courier delivered a thick envelope. Inside was the formal offer from the board, along with a handwritten note from my father. You've outplayed us all. I should have made you CEO years ago. I stared at the note, emotions churning. After decades of being overlooked, my father had finally recognized my value, but only after I'd demonstrated my power to destroy the company he'd built. The buzzing of my phone pulled me from my thoughts. It was a text from Lana. This isn't over. Of course it wasn't. Lana had never been one to accept defeat gracefully. But for the first time in our long, complicated relationship, I wasn't worried about her threats. I had the clients. I had a growing team. And most importantly, I had leverage. The coming weeks established a grueling new reality. Building a company from scratch while servicing existing clients proved even more challenging than I'd anticipated. We worked 14-hour days, turning our temporary office into a command center of organized chaos. Each morning began with an all-hands meeting to tackle the day's most pressing issues. Each evening ended with a review of what we'd accomplished and what still needed attention. The pace was unsustainable, but necessary for survival. 3 weeks in, I finally had time to properly respond to the board's offer. I invited Grace to review my counter-proposal before sending it. This is aggressive, she noted, reading through the terms. You're asking for double their offer, plus equity in Connors and Tate? 5%, I clarified. Enough to have a voice, not enough to trigger resentment. Grace leaned back in her chair. Val, can I be blunt? This feels personal. Of course it's personal. They're family. That's not what I mean. This feels like you're trying to prove something, rather than making the best business decision. Her observation stung because it contained truth. Was I pushing too hard to make a point? The board's initial offer had been generous. Doubling down might be unnecessarily antagonistic. You're right, I conceded. Revise it to a 20% increase over their offer, with the equity request intact. That's fair value for what we bring to the table. Grace nodded approvingly. Much better. Now, what about your sister? She's been notably quiet since that text message. I had been wondering the same thing. Lana's silence was uncharacteristic and concerning. I have a meeting with her tomorrow, I admitted. Just the two of us, away from the company. She requested it. Do you want me there? I shook my head. Some conversations need to happen without lawyers. The following day, I met Lana at a small coffee shop equidistant from both our offices. She was already seated when I arrived, her expression unreadable. You look tired, she said as I sat down. Building a company is exhausting, I replied. You'd know that if you'd ever done it. It was a cheap shot, but weeks of stress had worn my diplomacy thin. Lana didn't take the bait. I've been doing some thinking, she said, stirring her coffee. About why you set up that LLC structure in the first place. Enlighten me. You never trusted us. Not me, not Dad, not the board. You always needed your own safety net. I considered her words. Trust has to be earned, Lana. Dad spent years overlooking my contributions while elevating yours. You spent years taking credit for my work. What exactly was I supposed to trust? We're family, she said, as if that explained everything. Family businesses fail precisely because people confuse family loyalty with business sense, I countered. Dad made you CEO because you're his daughter, not because you were the best person for the job. And you created a secret company to steal our clients because you're what? Some misunderstood business genius? I created a structure that protected the value I built. Value that you and Dad were happy to benefit from until you decided I was expendable. Lana's facade finally cracked. You want to know why Dad made me CEO instead of you? Because you're ruthless, Val. This stunt with the contracts proves it. You'd burn down the whole company to prove a point. Her words hit harder than I expected. Was that how they saw me? As someone willing to destroy our family legacy out of spite. I didn't burn anything down, I said quietly. You lit the match when you fired me. I'm just making sure I don't get consumed in the flames. We stared at each other across the table, decades of sisterly competition distilled into this moment of brutal honesty. So what happens now? Lana finally asked. That was the million-dollar question. 3 months after Lana fired me, I stood in the lobby of Covenmere Defense, our newest and largest client. Their contract would push VC Strategy Group's annual revenue past $40 million, nearly double what my team had managed while at Connors and Tate. Impressive operation you've built in such a short time, remarked Edward Hughes, Covenmere's procurement director, as he led me through their facility. We had a unique launching point, I explained. An established team, proven expertise, just under a new banner. And without the family drama, I hear. He gave me a knowing look. Nashville's business community isn't that large, Valerie. Word gets around. I maintained a professional smile. Every company has its evolution story. Indeed. Well, we're excited to work with you directly. Your reputation for hands-on management is exactly what we need for our supply chain overhaul. Later that afternoon, I returned to our new permanent offices, a renovated warehouse space with exposed brick walls, open workstations, and private meeting rooms named after our first clients. In just 3 months, we'd grown from 8 employees to 23. Jordan met me at the door with barely contained excitement. The Connors and Tate board accepted our counter-proposal. We're officially their primary logistics partner for the next 3 years. I felt a complex wave of emotions, satisfaction, vindication, and a touch of melancholy. Have they announced it internally yet? Scheduled for tomorrow morning, Lana will have to explain to the entire company that they're now subcontracting their core business function to her sister's firm. That can't have been an easy pill for her to swallow. Jordan grinned. From what I hear, she fought it until the end. The board finally gave her an ultimatum: accept the partnership or resign. I sighed. She won't forgive me for this. Not ever. Do you care? It was a fair question. The relationship between Lana and me had been broken long before this business conflict. Still, there was a finality to this arrangement that felt heavier than simple business competition. I care, I admitted, but not enough to sacrifice what we're building here. The formal announcement of our partnership with Connors and Tate triggered a new phase of growth for VC Strategy Group. With our former employer now effectively our largest client, we had the stability to pursue aggressive expansion. 6 months after Lana fired me, I found myself preparing for a meeting I never expected to have. My father had requested lunch, just the 2 of us, at his favorite steakhouse. He was already seated when I arrived, looking older than I remembered. The stress of the company's near collapse had taken a visible toll. You look good, Val, he said as I sat down. Success suits you. Thank you, I replied, uncertain where this conversation was heading. I owe you an apology, he continued, surprising me. Several, actually. I waited, giving him space to elaborate. I should have recognized your talents years ago. Should have made you CEO when I stepped down. He shook his head. I was blinded by traditional thinking. The oldest child inherits the crown, regardless of capability. Lana had her strengths, I offered, feeling an unexpected urge to defend my sister. She did, but they weren't the right ones for leading the company. He looked directly at me. You outmaneuvered all of us, Val. created your own safety net right under our noses. I'm not sure whether to be angry or impressed. Both would be appropriate, I said with a small smile. The board is considering a restructuring, he said after a pause. They want to bring you back, not just your company as a contractor, but you personally, as CEO. I nearly choked on my water. And Lana? She'd transitioned to Chief Marketing Officer, her natural strength. She'd never accept that. She already has, he replied. Conditionally. What condition? That you two find a way to repair your relationship. That's why I'm here, Val. Not just as your father, but as the company founder. We need both of you, working together instead of against each other. I sat back, processing this unexpected development. I don't know if that's possible. Perhaps not, but isn't it worth trying? I wasn't sure. The gulf between Lana and me had grown so wide, I couldn't imagine bridging it now. As I left our new headquarters on a crisp autumn evening 6 months after launching my own company, I couldn't help but smile at the illuminated sign above our door. The journey from being fired to building a thriving business had been challenging but immensely satisfying. With 35 employees now, multi-million-dollar contracts, and even Connors and Tate as our client, I had transformed betrayal into spectacular success. Looking toward the future, I knew I had many more chapters to write in my business story. But the sweetest one would always be how my sister's attempt to push me aside had inadvertently given me the empire I truly deserved.